All right. Well, thank you for joining us this evening and taking some time out of your busy day and your evening away from your family for a few moments. We just wanted to bring everybody up to speed on some of the changes that have occurred in the past week due to some legal challenges to the governor's executive orders that he issued back at the beginning of the pandemic, as well as the expiration of the Illinois Department of Public Health and the Illinois State Board of Education's guidance for schools for the COVID-19 pandemic. How did we get here? Well, it was an interesting week, an interesting month so far, actually, to be quite honest. Back early in the month on February 4th, which was a Friday at about 4 p.m., we received notice that the Sangamon County Judge Grishow, who's in the Springfield area, issued a temporary restraining order pausing the governor's executive orders that mandated mask wearing, the vaccination requirements, which resulted in weekly testing, and close contact exclusions for nearly 170 plus school districts that were named in a lawsuit statewide. For us, that didn't really impact us. We kept operating under the executive order because we were not named in the lawsuit, and our attorneys advised us to do so. Fast forward about 10 days to Monday, February 14th, the IDPH and ISBE emergency COVID mitigation guidelines expired, and they the next day sought on the 15th emergency extension from the Joint Committee for Administrative Rules, also known as JCAR in the state. That 11-panel board, 9 members of which were present, decided to reject the emergency mitigation guideline extension, leaving school districts without any official guidance from the Department of Public Health or the State Board of Education. As a result, districts were scrambling and attorneys were forming opinions about whether or not we could enforce mask mandates, we could enforce staff vaccinations, and whether or not we could enforce keeping students home that were asymptomatic or symptomatic for that matter with COVID-19 symptoms. Our attorney drafted a resolution. Our board called an emergency board meeting on Thursday, February 17th, and they approved the resolution as presented by the attorney. It covered all elements of the Illinois Department of Public Health and Illinois State Board of Education guidelines that it now caused. Because we couldn't mandate, we now can only recommend or strongly recommend that we follow the guidelines. So what that resolution called for was the strong recommendation for everyone to continue wearing masks, for the strong recommendation that everyone get vaccinated and continue testing on a weekly basis, and that we not restrict access to school for any student, regardless their COVID situation, whether they were positive for COVID, whether they had COVID symptoms, or they were asymptomatic. The next day, Friday, February 18th, the Illinois Appellate Court rules that the TRO is moot because the IDPH and ISBE guidelines no longer exist. So they were ruling on an appeal from the governor to put his executive order back in place. The court decided not to rule on it, saying we have nothing to rule. There are no guidelines for us to judge or to determine whether or not they are fair or constitutional. Given that information, our attorney again took a look at the recommendations and asked for us. She in fact felt that she overextended the district a little bit by allowing students or staff who are symptomatic or had tested positive for COVID to come to the buildings. So she revised the resolution, and we called a second emergency meeting on Friday afternoon at 3:30 p.m. And our 5 board members who were able to be present for that Zoom remote meeting voted to approve the amended resolution. And that is what we're going to talk about this evening. I'm going to move on to the next slide. We're going to break out those next 3 recommendations. The first recommendation stayed the same as the original resolution, and that is the board recommends, but does not mandate, that district personnel, students and visitors wear masks while on school grounds for the remainder of the school year, 21-22. What I would like to share with parents who are with us this evening is that if you want to ensure that your child is wearing a mask during school, if it is your wish that they wear their mask all day, Please notify your teacher, your child's teacher, of those wishes, and they will do their best to reinforce mask wearing. You're sending your students with their mask on in the morning, and you anticipate or expect for them to wear it all day, but we know that sometimes students will allow the mask to slip down, or perhaps because their friend's not wearing a mask, they might like to let their mask fall down or not wear it properly. And if you let the teacher know that you, in fact, do want the child to be wearing their mask throughout the day, you can let them know that. Either send a note with your student, send an email, or communicate through Seesaw or Schoology with your teacher. Recommendation number 2, board recommends but does not mandate that the District 104 personnel be vaccinated for COVID-19, and if unvaccinated, obtain a weekly test. We can no longer require that our staff get vaccinated, and they are not required to test weekly. However, we will continue to provide free testing every Friday for any staff member, whether they're vaccinated or not, to attend. If we find that no one is showing up, we will obviously stop that program. Currently, a little over 93% of our staff are vaccinated. And finally, recommendation 3, and this is the recommendation that was changed from the original resolution. And the board recommends, but does not mandate, that District 104 personnel, students, and visitors exposed to COVID-19 via close contact stay at home for the time period recommended by the Center for Disease Control if they are asymptomatic, meaning in the past, if a student was identified as a close contact because they were in a room with a student who may have had COVID or had COVID symptoms, they too had to quarantine. That is no longer, it's recommended, but we will not mandate that as long as the student stays asymptomatic. Staff and students who have tested positive for COVID-19 or have COVID-19 symptoms must quarantine for at least 5 days and may return on day 6 if all symptoms have cleared, and that's following the guidance of the CDC. We will provide remote learning for students who either voluntarily quarantine if they were a close contact and choose to stay home, and we will provide remote learning for those students who are positive for COVID-19 or have COVID-19-like symptoms. So what now? There's a lot of information in a short amount of time. Let me summarize the best I can, and then we'll open up for questions. So this is an important note to make, in that federal guidelines, there are federal guidelines that dictate what happens on school buses because they're considered public transportation. The federal guidelines still require masks that be worn on public transportation, and therefore we do require that masks be worn while students are on the bus if they take the bus to school or take it home. We will no longer exclude individuals who are in close contact with a positive COVID-19 case unless they develop COVID-like symptoms or test positive for COVID. Our nurses will be in communication with you if your child is believed to be a close contact, and then you can make that decision. Individuals who are symptomatic or have had a positive COVID test will be excluded from school based on guidance from the CDC. Those students will have to stay home for 5 days and may return on day 6 if the symptoms resolve. And again, the nurses will be in communication with you regarding return dates and testing and so forth. Schools will continue to offer our voluntary COVID-19 testing program, and the test to stay protocol will be offered when appropriate. We will continue to encourage hand washing protocols and the use of hand sanitizer on a regular basis. We will continue our classroom disinfection protocols, and we will continue to social distance 3 to 6 feet as much as possible. There are certain situations that we've had to come to accept, the cafeteria being one, which is nearly impossible to keep students 6 feet apart. In some cases, we're having a difficult time keeping them 3 feet apart, but we will continue to do our best in all other situations to keep students 3 to 6 feet apart and staff as well. I'm going to pause now and see if we have any questions specific to the resolution that was passed or anything that's happened recently in the state regarding the Department of Public Health and State Board of Education guidelines. Ms. Johnson, do we have anything in the chat?
Nothing in the chat yet, Dr. Rayl. Oh, here is one. I still question the original decision to allow COVID positive people in the school. Even if it was for one day, the comment states it was completely irresponsible. As a new parent to the district, this has not made me confident in the decision-making of the board.
Well, thank you for that comment. The board was following the attorney guidelines, which from a liability standpoint, boards often listen to the guidance of their attorney because the attorneys have the background knowledge on how to interpret the law. Because things have been changing so quickly this past week, was the board's attorney's opinion initially that all of the IDPH and ISB guidelines were considered a violation of human rights. And so therefore she wrote the resolution the way that she did. I can tell you, I don't think that there was a single person in the district or the board that was happy with that guidance, but that is what the attorney recommended for liability's sake. Thankfully, she gave it some additional consideration, and by Friday afternoon, we had the situation corrected.
Thank you, Dr. Whalen. And the next question that I can respond to asks who our attorney is. Our firm is Odelson and Stirk. The next question, what happens if there is an outbreak based on the lifted restrictions? What are the metrics that will be used to determine a change of the current resolution?
Thank you for asking that question. We will continue to work with Cook County Health Department as we have from the very beginning of the pandemic, and report cases as we know, as they become known to us, and they will make that determination as it is their power to do so. They look to see whether or not the cases are linked, and that would determine whether or not we have an outbreak and would have to take an adaptive pause or other proactive measure.
Thank you. No other questions in the chat at this time.
You're also welcome to ask any questions directly if you'd rather not type them in the chat.
So I have a comment, not so much a question. I would be remiss if I didn't express that I feel like this meeting is an afterthought to the decisions that were made. I feel like the board hesitates with transparency and communication with our parents. You guys sent out that letter last Wednesday saying that you were going to hold an emergency meeting. I know I kept checking the website and I emailed you, Dr. Whalen, to see when that emergency meeting was going to be held. And parents weren't notified of when it was being held in person and available for public attendance. I feel like that reverts us back to the past 2 years, the lack of communication, the lack of transparency. I feel like we lack unity as a board with its community. The decisions are being made and handed down by the board, but the board's not even present today. You know, so to me, and I know these are elected officials and I know that these mandates are happening externally out of your control and not at the behest of the board or yourself, Dr. Whalen, but I feel like the importance should heavily be enforced that we as the parents are the stakeholders of our kids' education and should then at least be involved and included in these decision makings. Although our, opinions and what have you might not force a resolution that the parents want or, different than your attorneys, I think at least including us gives us that regard. These officials are elected to advocate on behalf of not only the parents, but the students. And I feel like, yet again, they have failed to do so.
Thank you for your comments, feedback.
There is additional feedback and some questions. A clarification, if we want our child to wear the mask all day, we message their teacher. correct? Yes, Ms. Santana, that is correct. Next question. I want to mention thanks to all who toughed through this. We have 2 kids in the district and we think a lot of stuff was done correctly.
Thank you. If I could just, okay, if I could just back
Yes,
up to the
and that was
previous-
from Ms. Rodriguez.
Thank you.
Ms. Santana responded that she does agree with Ms. Rangel. She said Evelyn, and especially the circumstances of a snowstorm. Mr. Charles mentioned it seemed to be against the public meeting laws in Illinois. Dr. Whalen, do you want to speak to that?
Certainly. So there are 3 types of meetings that can occur in the state under the Open Meetings Act for public bodies that include school boards, of course. There's a regular meeting and there's a special meeting, and both of those meetings require 48 hours notice prior to the meeting posting of that on the website and on the door of the facility where the meeting will be held. In an emergency meeting, it's such as this, where we had to have an emergency meeting. Another reason for an emergency meeting might be that the roof of a building blows off and you have to have a quick decision on a contractor, for example, some sort of act of God type of incident. In those cases, we follow school board policy and school law as well, and it's the notice as soon as practical or possible. And so we posted the meeting at about 4 p.m. on Wednesday afternoon when we knew we had to have the meeting. We had fully anticipated, looking at the weather forecast, that we called an e-learning day because the weather was supposed to hit in the morning and clear by afternoon. So the board made the decision, board president and I made the decision on Wednesday morning to hold the meeting in person. So we did follow all the Open Meeting Act requirements for an emergency meeting. The meeting on Friday happened even faster to correct or make an amendment to the resolution. And so that meeting was posted just a few hours or maybe an hour before the meeting. So the board did follow all protocol for an emergency level meeting. And based upon, again, attorney input, having some sort of recommendation in place warranted an emergency meeting. A number of other districts in the area called emergency meetings as well, if they didn't already have one on the books when this ruling actually came down from the Joint Committee on Tuesday.
Thank you, Dr. Whalen. We don't presently have any questions in the chat, so certainly we invite anyone with a question or a comment to please speak.
I'm going to piggyback on that last comment. So although you guys followed protocol for emergency meetings, my comment is that although you may have followed them in terms of you don't have to notify parents or the community within a certain amount of time because it's considered an emergency, I would say that as a parent, it seems that you guys are following the bare minimum, when indeed as elected officials and educators and district officials, you should be going above and beyond to ensure inclusivity.
Thank you for your feedback on that as well. I can certainly share that with the board.
Thank you, Ms. Rangel. Is there anyone else who would like to ask a question, a clarifying question or a comment at this time?
Okay. Well, thanks everyone again for joining us this evening. Right now, we believe we will be stabilizing here for the next few weeks, hopefully. I know that the governor is pushing for the Supreme Court to try to overturn the Sangamon County ruling. So we will see if something should change and that does occur. We will hold another meeting and update you at that time as well. So thank you and have a wonderful evening, everyone. Have a good night.
Thank you, and there are greetings signing off, Dr. Whalen.
Thanks, everybody.